Very much, because let's get to the speakers. The medium is the message, organizing efficient and nurturing environments. Their bios are in the back of the booklet. Terry, take it away.
Okay. Hi. I first want to say that I've learned everything I know about this from all of you. I know, there you are. So I'm going to start with a brief case study, and with Danelle's permission. This is actually a design that came out of a desire to do a Make-A-Wish Foundation grant for Danelle's son, Levi. And it was after we had started working on the Crescent Cove project. So we got to know them, and we had part of our team turned into Team Levi at RSP. And so in addition to working on Crescent Cove, we did this. And so these are pictures of Levi. So for those of you who haven't met him, here he is with his mom and his dad. And I'm not going to ask you to read all this, but basically what we were trying to do here was create a natural environment. Originally, they planned to do something outside in the backyard and didn't get the zoning passed to do that. So we thought about doing it in the attic and creating a space where Levi could experience the outdoors inside. So the concept was really, and we called it Camp Shoe. So, sadly we didn't get this done before Levi died. And I have to tell you that sort of is the truth of this. And that still breaks my heart. But we thought this through as a family place, and that Levi and his brother could hang out here and be in the space together and experience the seasons in the safe interior spaces of this attic. What was interesting is that there was a chimney stack that was right smack in the middle of this place. So we thought we would turn it into a tree and create these zones of experience that would really allow the kids to really play at daytime and nighttime, and then have a clean area. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we understand that parents can do in terms of adjacencies in their own homes, from the point of view of like medical planning, how we would design things. So you can think like a designer in your own home, in your own space. So these are just some quick images of what the stairway looked like. We provided these tent spaces. Some of them were daytime spaces, some were night. The nighttime area kind of took a lot of learning from the snoozling room types of environments that are very multi-sensory. And so I also am an exhibit designer. I worked a lot in the Children's Museum and designed the very first infant exhibit, which has words, as you might imagine. So we were kind of thinking about tactile elements. We were thinking about things that Levi would really appreciate. And so these are all based very, very specifically on where he is, where he was. Creating light spaces, creating pathways, creating a fenced yard even, and different viewpoints from different places. An indoor swing, boxes for different kinds of elements that we could bring inside at different times of year, including ice and snow, and tactile elements as well. Thinking about just lighting. So I just wanted to show these two. This is a really great, OptiAura is a great tool and is available for just projecting on ceilings and creating these great sort of celestial types of environments. And when we added all of this up, I mean, there are prices in here too, which we don't have to go through, but we were thinking it through so that they knew, how much money that would need to be invested in this. And the entire thing, plumber not included, but was going to be probably, about $1,200 of materials total. So it wasn't really a very expensive thing. The build-out would be an additional cost, but we stopped short of that, obviously. But here was the actual design of it. And I just want to, kind of transition to what can be done, thinking like a medical planner in your own home. If it's possible to dedicate a space, that's really awesome, but it doesn't have to be that. That was one of the luxuries that we had in your home. The other thing is, change it up, again, if you want. All of these things are very fluid. We were thinking, I was meeting with Carla, who is the interior designer who worked in Crescent Cove yesterday. We were talking about just magnet boards and photo booths and, which could be boxes, and seasonal stuff. Like a whiteboard is an awesome tool on wheels to create a sense of division of space. One of the things that I noticed when we did our research for Crescent Cove was that there were a lot of things in the environment. The ER in the living room, the medical equipment. And so I think one of the things that we would suggest is really subtractive gardening. It's like take anything out that you can store safely in another environment, so that you don't have to look at all of that equipment all the time. The other thing is, think about the fact that little tiny changes really can add up to big spatial kinds of things. So if you can start to compartmentalize some of the things that you have to store and put them into a particular place, just thinking like, mentally like California closets, how can I actually put this out of my view? And it's not having to be kind of triggered every day too, with some of the visuals in the environment. And then what needs to be close to what, and this is like a kind of a fun exercise on an interview level with the people who are on your team, is to say, what would be ideal for you if you're caring for my child or my spouse or whomever, to be able to understand what adjacencies you need. Do you need a sink that's really close? What are some of the things, where would you like the storage of some of the equipment that you actually need to access on a regular basis? And then I love this idea of doing house hacks and starting, among the Crescent Cove community, just like hashtag house hacks. Like, just share the things that you're doing. I did this cool thing. It's almost like a Pinterest board waiting to happen, right? No, it is. So the first step really in this process is, when you started moving medical equipment into your home, what was displaced? What went away? Was it a piano? Was it, was it an easel? Was it a drawing table? So think about the things that are important to you, because if they're important to you, that's what matters. It's not about whether or not you should or shouldn't have certain things in your house. And I think that the nice thing about having kind of an internal play space or kind of dedicated space on some level is that, you can have play dates that are a little safer sometimes too from an infection standpoint. You can just kind of create those environments that other parents want to come to, and you have the opportunity to hang out together. I just wanted to briefly share this. When we did our research for Crescent Cove, we had the opportunity and the honor of talking with so many families who've been affected. And one of the things, this is just when we're doing qualitative research, we're really looking for the themes that come up over and over again. And the one that I'm just going to talk about just for a minute, because I think every single interview, it didn't matter if it was with a caregiver, if it was medical staff, if it was family, everybody mentioned guilt. The word actually literally was mentioned. And, even Jonathan, when he was talking about, the fear of guilt, if it happens on my watch, right? So there were all these different dimensions to that. And so one of the biggest things that we really wanted to provide for Crescent Cove families was an opportunity, because the opposite of guilt is not a lack of guilt. We started really kind of peeling it back, and we started thinking about the fact that underneath guilt is permission. It's permission to grieve, it's permission to not know something. It's permission to take some time for yourself, which was the one thing that we realized that a lot of parents needed to get in order to even engage with Crescent Cove. A lot of people were fearful about the idea of handing the care of their child, medically fragile child, over to an organization, right? So I brought with me, and this is just to kind of kick off the rest of the conversation. And I'm going to hand them out to you, and I'm going to ask you to all fill them out and figure out what it is that you need. And you can start there, from the standpoint of moving into designing an experience for yourself that really works.
Why don't we let them hear the other speakers, and we'll hand that out in just a bit. Let's move on through to get the wide arc of perspectives. Jill?
Okay, so I'm going to talk from both a family and a professional perspective, because I have a daughter who's now 22, who still is at home with me, very medically complex. And I go work with a lot of these families in their own homes, and I try to help educate and try to help navigate the waters of their own space. So a lot of us don't have lots of extra money to do adaptions to our homes or do anything like that. But I want to just bring up some really key points that really can make such a huge difference. So I'm going to put my glasses on here so I can see. But one of the things is home is a place for family. It's a place for healing. It's a sacred place for us. And just like Crescent Cove is a sacred place too. But one of the things that I try to help navigate when we're thinking about all the medical equipment and all the things in the home is that we want to reverse stress, and we want to create a supportive space for healing to occur, for family to occur, for friends, extended family, neighbors, whoever that might be. But we want that to reverse stress and create healing, even in the midst of, if it's going to be death, we want to create healing space. So some of the things that I just throw out is declutter. Declutter what you can as much as you can. And get rid of some of the extra clutter that you don't need in your life at that point in time. And maybe make some cozy, simple changes. A simple, really cozy couple blankets on the couch or the chair or a rocking chair. Some stuffed pillows that can make life more comfortable for everybody if you're just hanging out. I mean, those are simple things that really don't cost much money, but that can be incorporated. Or maybe you have them laying around, you just haven't figured out a creative way to do it. We really, especially if you have caregivers coming and going in your home, and we all do typically. I actually have, my daughter requires extended nursing care. So she requires 24/7 care, and if it's not me, it's a nurse that's in our home. That creates a whole separate thing on itself, and I deal with a lot of families who have nursing or PCs in their home too. There is like no sacred space for us. So you need to create that sacred space where you have. And you need to kind of set up some boundaries too with those caregivers to say, I need you to go in the room. We're going to be a family right now. We're going to have our sacred time. I have a small little house from the 60s, so it's very difficult as a rambler, very small space. I don't have much space in there. But I have learned to create that sacred space. Or if there's really no space, because they can hear our conversation from my daughter's bedroom to the living room, well, then close the door, and we're in the living room right now. That's our time. That's our space. It was really important for us, and I think it's really important for a lot of families and the children that we serve, is they don't want their room to look like a hospital room. They don't want it to look like that. Yes, we have lots of medical equipment. My daughter's trach demented. So we've tried to hide as much equipment in the dressers, in the drawers, in the closets, whatever, other closets outside of the room. We have made her room look like her room, how she wants it, with pictures of her sisters up, that type of thing. And I think that that's really important for us to remember too. We have to have some medical equipment out right at our bedside, and some, on a couple carts there, but it's minimal, and we try to just make it look like that. Things that are really important are light. Light is important. Sometimes we need to have lots of natural light. Sometimes we need to have just very soft, quiet, darker environment. So we have a dimmer switch on her room, on her light in her room. That can make a huge difference. We have a salt lamp in her room, which we put in there, which is for healing for her, and it just gives that little, just subtle light. So things like light make a big difference. Outdoor spaces, again, are critical. Those of us that deal with this on a day-to-day basis, especially in Minnesota winters, it gets really icy cold here, and we get housebound. We get cabin fever, like severe cabin fever. So we even have done simple things like in the middle of winter, we have a bonfire, and we go out to that bonfire, and we are in outdoor space. So think about, you know, your gardens during the summer or your outdoor spaces in the summertime, but even in the middle of winter, you can have outdoor space, create that. And we don't have anything fancy, I just have a fire pit, we go out and have a fire. So that's something that's really important. Bring in nature, like Danelle's home, obviously they were talking about that. You can use plants, you can use aquariums, you can bring in the rocks and that kind of thing. One of the other things with just space itself is that sometimes, and it kind of goes back to that sacred space, but you have so many people coming and going from your home. One of the things that I've asked not to have with my extended family, friends, neighbors, that kind of thing, please don't just drop in. I just can't do drop in. And a lot of families drop in, all of a sudden, they have no idea where you are in your day. You might have just walked in the door, you might be in the middle of a medical procedure or whatever, but for some families, drop in is not the ideal. Text me to say, hey, can I drop in or whatever. Here's a big one, I think, for us as families, and I think at Crescent Cove, when there's lots of staff there, when there's lots of kids there, and maybe family members and everything else, but there are times, and especially like for Crescent Cove, I can think of, especially when you have a family, as you start having end of life there, in Ryan's house too, and I don't know how Ryan's house does it, but reduce the roar, I call it the roar. Phones, noise, television, all of that. There are times we just need that roar, all the external noise gone. I can tell you from even just being in a hospital room, and you have all the monitors and all that, and then you have all the staff outside and they're laughing and they're doing all that, and then there's times when all you want is just pure silence. You just need to reduce that roar and that noise. But then there's other times it's like, let it go. You know what? Let's crank the music. Let's have music and just crank that and have some really fun and have laughter and joy and all of that too. So utilize the music, like I said. Also, you can utilize it for natural sounds, birds, waves, you know, water, the ocean, that kind of thing. That can be really healing. You can delight the senses. I always say, let's delight our senses using color and photos and fountains and aromatherapy or candles or whatever it might be. That can be kind of a combination of all of that. So, and then one of the other things with kind of reducing that roar is, gosh, your phone rings all the time. You've got people calling about appointments or reminders of appointments, or you know, family, especially if they're like if your child is more ill and all of that. So that's where I suggest to just, and this is part of your whole environment, it's part of your whole healing environment, but use like Hearing Bridge, or create a web page or a blog that somebody else manages besides you. And that all is just great ways to keep everybody connected without individual phone calls, emails, or texts. Those are all very time consuming, they're energy draining. Sometimes you just can't do that, but that's another way to create a really great environment in a home also. It's also a way to get back. Prayer is done on there. Encouragement, notes of encouragement. People send messages on those blogs or those sites, so it's a way to get back too. And then just also one thing I want to think about is, we're not only just talking about external environment here, but we're also talking about internal environment, and that's your personal wholeness with your mind, body, and your spirit. So that inner environment you have to create within a home, whether it's Crescent Cove or in your own home also. But look for optimism, hardiness, spiritual faith awareness, positive intentions, positivity. All of that creates that whole inner environment too, that all comes with it. And then the interpersonal environment too. So you want to have a healthy lifestyle, integrative care, use healing relationships to promote healing and health creation for your entire family. And those are just some of my tidbits regarding not just physical space.
Hi, my name's Mark. I want to thank Jill for following into my trap and giving me a very nice lead into what I'm going to talk about. I founded Circle Design as a element of healing and looking at the physical space as a tool. It really came from my background when I was going to design school, which is where we learn to spend all your money. So that's, I know you're looking at me like, here he comes. But I worked for the Cleft Palate Clinic at the University of Minnesota, and that was a really fantastic and very intimate experience where I got to really meet families and really become their advocate because, of course, dental and medical were denying them both. My first real design job was designing for the Rainforest Cafe, which you may have heard of, which I joke now about it being one of the world's most popular restaurants that no one goes to for the food. So now bringing those two together, a great passion for young children and their families and their care, and a great focus on design experiences Terry touched on at the beginning, coupled with a great conversation with those at Make-A-Wish, talking about, I'm going to simplify, 400 kids a year in 2017 were diagnosed in Minnesota with a life-threatening illness. 200 of those were given wishes, and of those, 2 were space designs. So that's 1% of all those children. And the reason it was 2 is because it's very difficult for them. They rely a lot on volunteerism, and their budgets are very low. So it's a time or money conflict. So I'm like, well, that's just wrong. Get out of my way, here we go. So I'm all about raising the exposure because this is so important. Those Disney trips are great. I'm sure people in this room have been involved in those. Meeting the celebrities are wonderful, but that's 1 week out of 52.
Yep.
So it's really, really important, I think, to focus a lens on design. And these examples here are not necessarily for kids in a palliative situation, but just an idea about what we can do better. So working with, oh, thank you. Thank you. Come on. So when I'm talking with families, and siblings, and kids, it's really about hitting the base sensory experience and really spending a lot of time talking about where are we with sensory systems before we can even move up the ladder and being able to do more. I mean, my whole focus is as we've heard, I'm sure you'll hear, is minimizing stress, but I also want to find the joy somewhere in here. No matter who these kids are, there's joy and happiness that wants to come out of them. So clearly talking about senses, we all know what those are, but then also adding in, things from the autism spectrum and talk about, where are you in space? How are you manipulating? Where are you physically? Close your eyes and talk about what you want your spaces to become. Our eyes can deceive us often. Pinterest can deceive us very easily into thinking what we know what we want. But you close your eyes, you get a very different answer. And in working with facilities, whether it's Ronald McDonald, Shriners, or working at home, those approaches are very different in the conversations that we're going to talk about. So facilities, obviously, you're going to have a very diverse population, right? You've got a lot of people coming through that space, so flexibility is really key, as opposed to in your home. We'll talk about that. But infection control is super popular, right? Super important conversation that we have to have with all the people coming through space. And then privacy, which is very different. You mentioned respite. So finding those places in those very busy facilities where I can find some personal time. Home, obviously very different. I've got a very small population generally that I'm designing toward, which allows me more flexibility. But like you said, I'm going to have space limits typically. Space limits, either the physical space or the amount of stuff that I've inherited because of the situation that I've got. Oh, getting back to space for a second. You're familiar with GoFundMe and physical space. So GoFundMe, last year, 30% of their requests were for medical needs. A lot of those were physical space. We are not in a minority. There are a lot of people out there who need our help. So Jill, thank you. In talking about lighting, I thought, okay, here's the fancy designer in the room, but let's talk about what I call the cheap grab. You're going to have lights in your room, right? They're going to be there. So what can we do to minimize or to maximize the impact of that cheap resource to set the mood? Obviously, aromatherapy, you hit on that as being super quick in changing the mood, but lighting is obviously very important. I'll talk a little bit about color rendering index, if you don't know what that is. Because I have a great project story around that. So you buy your light bulbs, and they're a certain color, right? You've probably gotten some that are very orange, you've gotten some that are very blue. So when you're out buying those, if they're for your own home or for facility, you want to look for those, make sure you've got something that's closer to 100. Certainly in a facility, you might certainly see different light color types going through there. But color rendering index is so important, especially because we're human and we have skin. And I had a project where they insisted that the walls be Kermit the Frog green because I love Kermit the Frog. I'm like, okay, we're going to do it and turn the lights on. Everybody looked dead. It was horrible. I told them it was going to happen, but they wanted it. You know, we changed the paint color back. But it is really important to think about that as you're dealing with lighting. Dimming, obviously you mentioned dimming, ease of control for the user. How easy? What are the issues that I've got that are going to allow me to control my space? Right? Easy things that you can, little adapters that you can have, the little thumb terms that are a little bit larger. Certainly, Alexa now is available for us to change those rooms. There's great systems now, really inexpensive LED products that you can just say, you know, Alexa, I want, you know, sunrise orange this morning. And all of a sudden, you'll get that. So certainly easy to do. Natural daylight, you mentioned natural daylight. It's great. We all want daylight. As humans, we love daylight. But glare and reflection are a huge concern. So too much of a good thing is not great. There's a great example of color rendering index from left to right. You can see the difference there. So, skin. Here's a great example, and I'll wrap up with another example too. This is a great example of a fully integrated, sort of multifunctional space. You may have seen the adopter rooms. These were done a number of years ago down at Fairview. And yes, the room was a little bit larger. Fairview took 3 rooms and made them into 2. But these are end-of-life rooms. But the idea was very child-focused. From spaces that are neutral in color. Those are marker boards behind the screen so kids can write messages or do art. Multiple layered effects for the sunshades, and then a little space for families. You'll see the screens there. There's a great story about letting kids be kids. They mounted video cameras on top of the building, so the kids, they're right on River Road, right? So they can see the river gorge and all the beautiful things outside. Well, the other beautiful things outside are the dorms across from the river, and the young teenage boys were peeping into the dorms and the girls across. So they froze those cameras after a while. So a project I'm working on right now, I'm going to go through this really quickly because Gardner is helping us build it. This is Kodiak who has Charge syndrome, if you know what Charge syndrome is. So basically he's deaf and blind. He's about 15, and I can go into the whole story there. But it's a really fun space in their home. That we're really, really trying to maximize every space from a durability standpoint and from a flexibility standpoint. So basically we have a loft for him with a slide. We've got some lockable storage for family and para equipment. We've got a swing. We've got multiple places for hanging sensory devices. We've got storage for books. We've got trees that are coming off their own property. This is out in Forest Lake. Kodiak Kleiner. So that blue and purple thing are basically we're taking wind chimes, taking them apart, and using it as the railing for the slide. So hopefully I'm able to touch on some things that are accessible to you, and maybe not so much in the case of this last one. But just really wanted to emphasize the point of view that we can do more with space, and I think it's an exciting space to be in, despite the challenges that you may see.
I know we're coming up on time here, but
you're fine. Keep going.
All right. So my name is Dave Hacker. I'm with Gardner Builders. We had the honor of being involved in the Crescent Cove project, and it was an amazing experience for our team, and the outcome I think is even more amazing. So thanks for that opportunity. At Gardner Builders, we're a commercial general contractor. So we do all commercial projects, but we do get involved in some residential type projects. And as Mark mentioned, we are embarking on another adventure through Make-A-Wish for Kodiak, and we're super excited about that. And as a company, we really want to find ways to get back to the community. So we do try and do a lot of nonprofit work and help folks out where we can. So thinking about today, and I'm not sure what the entire demographic is here in the audience, but a lot of these ideas are quite simple and inexpensive, and are things that you as homeowners can tackle on your own. But there's another level of activity that, as a homeowner, depending on your skill set, I would not recommend trying on your own. There's code issues to consider. There's, I'll say the 4 main things to consider getting a professional in for is, if it involves some sort of structural element to your home, mechanical systems, electrical systems, plumbing systems. Those are all systems that can create much bigger problems if they aren't done correctly, and cities do require permits and plans and licensed professionals to do that. So caution everybody on embarking on some of these projects, and I suggest that you go out and try and find a professional that can help you. As Gardner Builders, commercial builder, we're not necessarily the perfect choice for a residential project. We don't have a residential license. We are a commercial builder and we fall in a different category. But there are a lot of resources out there to help find that builder that might be able to help you on your projects. And some ideas for you to consider. Call on your city. You have to get permits. Contractors have to pull permits. The city knows who the good builders are. They have the inspectors that are going out on site and inspecting this work, and they're a great resource to try and figure out who might be a good fit for your project. Word of mouth is always a great way. If you can find somebody that's done a similar project or some project around their house, reach out and ask them who they used, how did that experience go. There are a lot of online opportunities. I know in our neighborhood and in Southwest Minneapolis, there's Fulton next door. I think there's a lot of different next door communities out there. I see posts on there all the time. Hey, do you know a handyman that could help with this or that? Utilize that. One I've used personally is called Thumbtack, thumbtack.com. We had to bore a driveway, and so you just post on there what your project is, and it goes out through this system, and then you get responses from various contractors that are interested in the work, and then they'll come out and give you quotes. And I would recommend, you don't always have to stick with just one quote or one contractor. Go out there and ask for multiple pricing opportunities, because everybody's going to look at a project a little different. Everybody's got a little different expertise, and it's all about your dollar and the value of that dollar. You worked hard to earn that dollar, so you want to get the most out of it. And then I guess when you do find a contractor, make sure you do a little research on that contractor. Check on some references. Make sure they've got insurance. Make sure they've got a license. Those are important things, and are in place to ensure that you're going to get a project that's done correctly. So I guess those are some of the things I wanted just to throw out there. It's a lot to consider. Pricing is, can go from a few $100s to multiple thousands of dollars. So
What I didn't want to do.
So it's great to get additional quotes and do some research.
Let's first thank the 4 of them for their presentation. Thank you very much. And this is an odd duck group because we just put them together in the last few days. And so I'm wondering if you might have questions or comments to each other now that you've heard the various perspectives before we open it to the group. Is there something you want to ask one of your colleagues here on the panel, or comment about something that someone else said? You look as if you are about.
The only thing I want to comment on is there are sometimes funding resources out there that you need to know about. Typically, check with your county, a county social worker, county case manager, if your children are on county services, and you have to pay for part of it, but sometimes there are some funding resources out there, so don't feel like there's nothing out there for you, because there definitely are.
And to tap onto your last comment about contractors, it's great to get a referral, but you've got to go there and see their work. We had some neighbors, oh, we love John, he was awesome. The quality was not there. So make sure you spend that extra time, because otherwise you're going to be living with that for quite a while.
Okay. Questions for the panel before we give you our last task of the day, and so on. Questions for any of them about nurturing efficient environments for people in their homes, especially with someone who has severe medical needs, mental health needs. Jonathan.
If you're doing this in the home, which is awesome, if you can create that kind of environment for the family home and the child and the family, if there are elements of beyond coolness but actual practicality in terms of like a lift, a ceiling lift, or some element that is really functional more, do you have here in Minnesota opportunities to get the state to contribute to some of, I mean, we had renovations in our house that was all paid for by the state. I'm just curious if you're able to kind of split the bill with the state. I haven't heard.
Yes, that's one of the things that I was referring to, is that the state does help cover some of those, like, especially like a ceiling lift or ramp, things like that. There is funding resources out there. Sometimes adaptability, like if you need to widen doorways, even adapt a bathroom, the state often has funding resources for that type of thing.
It may not cover the whole cost.
No, it may not cover the whole thing, and there's certain, I know that there are certain things that, you know, like, for instance, if you've got to put in a floor, there are certain grades, and you can upgrade, but you have to pay the difference in the cost, things like that. So there is definitely some funding resources for that type of thing.
If I can just even make a comment about the process. Terry went first, had some of her slides and so on, presented some of her thoughts, including the work that she did with the Shu family. And then Tara came over to move from her slides, from Tara's, to yours. But Jill was the next speaker. And lots of you were looking at his slides as Jill was talking, at least for the first 3 minutes or so, 5 minutes and so on. It's the issue of distraction. In our own homes, if we need a time when we're not distracted by the street, by the noises, by something going on in another space, we need some kind of barrier. And it was just interesting to watch. Lots of you were glued to the screens as Jill was beginning her presentation, because we were mounting your slides, and we hadn't made that clear, and everybody thought, well, why isn't she using her slides? What's going on here? What's the deal? So it's the issue of, as we think about nurturing spaces, it has to do with, are there spaces in our house that are distracting us from doing what we want to do right now? Mm-hmm. Other questions for these builders and designers? Yes, Jim Rice.
Question for the audience. We were taking a risk or experimenting with this little panel. I'm just curious, with the families and the caregivers, is this an important topic for everybody?
I'm taking it offline after. It's very important for me.
Yeah, you say that's very important. Yes, Candace.
I do think it is. It's another resource. And it feels like being in your reading of the day is initiating and being another resource of things you may think of.
In some ways, it's an extension of the previous session on who's on your team. Most of us are not architects or designers, or I'm certainly not even a handyman, and so on. And so if there's something that can be done in my home that will make it more efficient and more nurturing, I'm going to need some help and need those people on my team. And so at least what I'm hearing the four of you say is that there are resources out there, there are people out there that will help you in terms of some of that design or some of that kind of work. Danelle, your hand was up.
When you have a child with medical complexities in particular, the medical moves in. When that child needs to have home-based services, that moves in. Caregivers, that moves in. And things move so rapidly that there isn't time to figure out where am I going to put it. It just keeps moving in, moving in, moving in. And then the space just is whatever it is by default, for better or for worse. And so this is, I feel, a really important conversation, and one that I found in our life wasn't initiated very often until it was a caregiver saying, you know those things you use to wipe his nose, they're like, the bucket's over there, can we move it closer? I'm like, move it. Sure. You know, just so much happens by default, and the time and space to think about crafting the experience for yourself, for your family, for your children, for the people helping you is really important.
It occurs to me that the three things that we hear from grieving people that they're not doing well, sleeping well, eating well, and good body care. Are you sleeping well? Are you eating well? Well, there are lots of parts of that, but are they not sleeping well because of the design of the house, the design of the bedrooms, because of some issues of sound deflection and so on? Are they not eating well, not only because of budget or whatever, but is the kitchen not a place where you can take a moment to do something that's a bit more, and I dare say gourmet, or a bit more tasty, and so on, because you're just hurrying through because of all these people who are coming in and out. So it seems to me that all of these things are coming together in what we're talking about today. How do we help people live the whole of their life, to sleep well, eat well, body care, as well as to have a nurturing environment? Terry.
I was just going to mention that when we were having the opportunity to, live a little bit in the space, with some of the people we visited, and in one case it was actually a woman who was dealing with cancer, and she had a lot of her medical documentation stored on top of her stove because she didn't have other places to put it. So this is where, I first start at safety. It's like there's a life safety component to this, which is actually, I get concerned about storage of oxygen. I get concerned about all of these things in terms of like where they are in relationship and, to other kind of home functions. And I really feel like, after this experience of working with Crescent Cove and with some of the Crescent Cove families, I thought, I wish there was just a clearinghouse for people who could go out and just do a really quick assessment and say, you know what, you need to move this over here. It really should not be close to the heating vent or whatever it might be. But, when you think about stacks and stacks of paper sitting on top of a stove in someone's home, because obviously that's a risk, but she's also not eating well.
Right.
That's the clue that she wasn't eating well. So I think that there's a lot that could be done just from an assessment standpoint to just help people live a little healthier in their own spaces.
But looking at environments too where they're these are family homes, and often they become medical homes. And so then, trying to integrate places where the siblings also feel like it's still their home. Because I'm living with a 2-year-old granddaughter right now. Oh my God. Everything goes in the dog water bowl, like everything. And then the remote just was in the toilet. So if you've got a 4 or 5 or 7-year-old with medical devices and you've got a toddler running around, how do you still make that your home but safe? If you have a teenager running around and she can't bring her friends over.
That's a great question. I hand that one off.
One thing that I would suggest to that, I have been into many, many different types of homes, and part of it is because of space issues, part of it is because that's how they choose to do it, but if it's at all possible, you leave your family room or your living room as a family room, as a living room. You don't move the kids into those spaces, and I've been into homes where those kids are moved, and not that that's wrong, I'm not saying that, but all of a sudden, and especially if you have caregivers in your home, all of a sudden there is zero sacred space anywhere. Leave the bedrooms as bedrooms, where that's where the cares are done, where that's where the child sleeps, if at all possible. And sometimes it's not, because sometimes it's a parent that's doing the hours or whatever. But I would highly suggest trying to leave those sacred spaces as sacred spaces, And those are off limits to other caregivers that might be in the home when you are there as a family.
Two things. Terry mentioned the assessment part. Back in my days in corporate, we would go through and do these assessments called Day in the Life. And you talk to different groups of people, and you run through sort of a day in the life of what they do. Do the same thing with the visitors and the people in your home, and then combine those solutions together. And then to tap onto what you said, what's been funny in doing these projects is especially in Kodiak's case, like the first designer quit because they thought it was too big a challenge. So I come in and I'm like, well, screw you. And through the course of developing the project, and it was scary for me too at the beginning. I was overwhelmed. I had done a space for a kid who was this disabled, but he's got a sense of humor, and he's a great kid. And as this design started happening, his siblings are like, well, where am I going? Where's my space in here? And that changed the design. And it is really cool because now it becomes a social space, which before it was sort of a timeout space. And that is very different, and that is a way more positive opportunity for him.
Can I add one other thing? The other thing that I would add to that is that, because I have 4 daughters, my medically complex daughter is my youngest. So her sisters were 7 and 9 and 16 at the time she was born. One of the things that sometimes happens in families is there is so much going on with those children that have medical complexities that it becomes very child-focused. That child-focused. You have to make sure, like, I am guilty of it many times over. Families are guilty of it, but you have to make sure that you are remembering the entire family when you are thinking about the space that you're utilizing. Those other siblings need their space. They need to be incorporated in the entire family, and other times they need their space. Like my 16-year-old daughter, she was 16 and she needed space with her friends. They needed a space to come over and hang out that wasn't in the midst of my youngest daughter at that time. So I think those are sometimes important things to remember too.
Related to this, I'm jumping back on something I think Jonathan or Katerina shared this morning, is that Crescent Cove and Ryan House and these kind of facilities, the emphasis, at least one of you emphasized, is on the parents. Because if the parent isn't happy, if the parent doesn't have some of his or her space, they're not going to be the best for their children. I hear lots of concerns about having places for the siblings, having places for the children, having their own bedrooms and so on. But we also need to put some emphasis on what you're calling sacred spaces or private spaces or nurturing places for these adults, so that maybe they can get a night's sleep, maybe they can get some respite themselves, even at home, even if it's a tag team and so on, so that they bring their better selves the next day rather than their depleted selves. So it's trying to think about all of the people who are involved in the flow of this particular facility. Would you take a deep breath? Lots of stuff today, including this rich panel. Can we thank these 4 people? Thank you, Dave. Let me ask you to do, and yes, we've got the piece that she wants to hand out, and you should do that. And so I want us to do a couple of things before we move to the refreshments and a chance for you to interact, because I'm sure our brains are full, our hearts are full, our butts are aching, and we just want to move around and so on. But what we know about days like this is that unless we begin to embody it, unless we begin to embed some of it, unless we begin to say, what have I learned today? What's a take-home piece for me? What is something that I can use? What is stirring around in me? Unless we do that, as soon as we begin to have our reception and social time, as soon as you get into the ease of Minnesota traffic at 5:30 or 6 o'clock and so on, where it's just respite all the time, and so on, you're going to lose it. So what I'd like you to do at your tables, first start with yourself until you're ready to engage with a neighbor. What are some take-home pieces for you from this day? what is grist for the mill and thought for you about this day? What's one thing you've learned or that's been reinforced? What's you're beginning to get the drift of it. So do a little of your own self-assessment first, and then when you're ready, see if a neighbor is ready to talk with you, because sometimes we need to say it out loud, otherwise we might forget it. And if you want to add a third person or a fourth person in terms of a table conversation, I'm not going to give you long on this. We're going to move to the reception a bit earlier because I think we all are pleasantly fatigued in terms of the richness of the day. So I'm only going to give you about 10 to 12 minutes and so on, so a shorter time. So begin to assess and talk a little bit about the day before we move on. Thank you very much.